My name is Elise Moreau. I was born in Lyon, France, into a family that looked polished from the outside but was fractured at its core. My father, Antoine, was a quiet accountant who buried himself in numbers and silence. My mother, Colette, on the other hand, was a woman who lived for appearances. She adored refinement, good wine, expensive dresses, and above all, her firstborn daughter, my older sister, Sabine. From the earliest days I can remember, there was an imbalance in our home. Sabine's drawings were framed, mine were left to curl on the kitchen counter until they ended up in the trash. When Sabine failed an exam, it was excused as pressure. When I came home with top marks, it was expected, nothing worth celebration. The favoritism was so woven into our family fabric that pointing it out made me sound bitter or jealous. But I wasn't jealous. I was simply invisible. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories, they're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. I was 16 when I first learned of the existence of the fund. My father, in one of his rare moments of candor, mentioned that both Sabine and I had accounts set aside for our education. "So that you won't have to worry," he told me, adjusting his glasses as if embarrassed by the slip. The number stayed with me, 40,000 euros. Enough to carry me through university, maybe even fund a year abroad if I managed well. For the first time, I felt a surge of security. Maybe my future wasn't entirely at the mercy of my mother's moods. But security has a way of dissolving in my family. 2 years later, as I filled out my final paperwork to attend architecture school in Paris, I discovered the truth. The account wasn't just empty. It no longer existed. My father's lips pressed into a thin line when I asked. He couldn't look at me. My mother, however, met my eyes without a flicker of shame. "I needed it for Sabine," she said simply, as though the theft of my future was no more scandalous than taking the last slice of bread. "For Sabine?" I asked, my voice trembling. "She and Julian are buying a house. They'll start a family soon. What would you need the money for? To chase dreams in Paris? Dreams don't put food on the table." It was in that moment that something inside me cracked. Not a sharp break, but a long fracture, the kind that runs deep and leaves you limping for years before it ever heals. I remember running to my room, slamming the door, and pulling out the acceptance letter from École d'Architecture de Paris Belleville. My hand shook as I read it again and again, the words blurred by tears. I had earned this. I had worked nights, tutored classmates, poured my soul into every sketch and model. And yet, my future was stolen with a shrug. That night, I confronted Sabine. She stood in her bedroom, trying on dresses in front of the mirror, her engagement ring catching the light. "You knew?" I demanded. She turned, her expression calm, almost pitying. "Elise, don't make this dramatic. You'll manage. You always do." Her words sliced deeper than my mother's betrayal. "You'll manage." As if resilience was my curse, as if survival meant I didn't deserve support. At 18, I left. My father offered no resistance, and my mother didn't stop me. Sabine barely looked up from her glittering life. I packed what I could into 2 suitcases, but the truth was I had nowhere to go. For weeks, I lived in my old Renault Clio, the back seat folded down to make a bed. I parked in quiet corners of Lyon, hidden behind supermarkets or under bridges, clutching my sketchbook like it was oxygen. At night, I would trace the outlines of buildings under the faint light of a street lamp, convincing myself that if I could design something beautiful on paper, then maybe, just maybe, I could redesign my life. The 40,000 euros were gone. My mother's justification still echoed in my head. But I swore, shivering in that car, that one day I would earn far more than what was stolen from me. And when that day came, they would see me, not as the invisible daughter, not as the disposable one, but as the woman who refused to break, even when they tried. I had nothing but a sketchbook, 2 suitcases, and the bitter taste of betrayal when I drove away from Lyon. Paris was supposed to be my destination, but how does a girl with no savings and no safety net survive in the most expensive city in France? I ended up in a small town outside Dijon instead, drawn there by a notice I saw in a cafe window, chambre à lower, a room for rent. The landlady, Madame Fournier, was a widow in her late 60s with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She took one look at me, skinny, exhausted, clutching my bag like a shield, and asked, "Can you pay?" I lied. I told her I had freelance work lined up. She didn't believe me, but she let me stay anyway. "You'll scrub the floors then," she said, tossing me a set of sheets. So I scrubbed floors. I washed dishes. I cleaned guest rooms in her crumbling old inn. By day, I worked with my hands. By night, I worked with my dreams, sketching designs in the attic room she gave me. I devoured architecture books from the town library, copied floor plans until my wrists ached, and trained myself as though Paris was still waiting for me. Those years hardened me. Hunger has a way of stripping illusions. I learned to live on baguettes and soup, to stitch my clothes when they tore, to silence the voice inside that kept whispering, "It isn't fair." Fairness was a luxury. Survival was my reality. Yet even in exile, beauty found me. There was an abandoned stone church at the edge of town, roof caved in, walls scarred with moss and time. Most people avoided it. To me, it became a sanctuary. I would sit inside the skeleton of that church, staring at the way light filtered through broken beams and fallen arches. It was ruin, yes, but it was also possibility. I told myself, one day I will restore something like this. One day I will prove that broken things can be remade. It was there, in that ruin, that I met Adrian Keller. Adrian was a German exchange student studying art in Dijon. He had the kind of presence that filled a space effortlessly, dark blonde hair that always fell into his eyes, a laugh that carried like music. He found me sketching the arches one evening and sat beside me without asking. "You see the bones," he said, pointing at my drawing. Most people only see the collapse. It startled me how easily he understood. For months, he became my companion. We shared bread, cigarettes, whispered conversations about art and survival. He came from wealth, yet he carried his own rebellion. He had walked away from his family's law dynasty to paint. Perhaps that's why he understood me. But love, if that's what it was, couldn't heal everything. Adrian wanted me to follow him back to Berlin when his program ended. He promised me a studio, space to breathe, a chance to reinvent myself. For a moment, I considered it. But deep inside, Paris still called to me like a stubborn ghost. My dreams weren't in Berlin nor in Dijon. They were carved into the skyline of Paris, waiting for me. When I told him I couldn't go, his eyes softened with disappointment. "You carry your battles like stones," he said. "One day, they'll crush you if you don't let someone carry them with you." I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to let anyone carry my stones. By the time I turned 22, I had saved enough, barely. Years of cleaning, tutoring, odd jobs, and small commissions added up to a fragile foundation. It wasn't the 40,000 euros my parents stole, but it was mine. Every coin, every bill earned with my hands, my exhaustion, my will. I moved to Paris at last, to a cramped studio apartment on Rue Oberkampf. It was nothing like the glossy dreams I had imagined as a girl. The walls were cracked, the plumbing groaned like an old man, and the ceiling leaked in the rain. But to me, it was sacred ground. My exile was over. Of course, Paris didn't welcome me with open arms. Architecture programs demanded tuition I could barely afford, professors who dismissed me for lacking connections, and classmates who looked at me with polite disdain. Yet I stood my ground. If I couldn't study formally, I would study through observation. I roamed the city, tracing the lines of Haussmann boulevards, sketching Gothic cathedrals, absorbing every curve and symmetry the city offered. At night, I returned to my leaking apartment, lit a candle, and worked. My neighbors thought me strange, the quiet girl always bent over paper. But I wasn't just drawing. I was building myself line by line, structure by structure. I carried Adrian's words with me. The stones were heavy. Loneliness pressed in like a second skin. But Paris gave me something Dijon never could, the reminder that greatness was carved out of persistence, not privilege. And if Sabine had stolen my inheritance, then I would carve out my empire without it. That promise, that vow, became the steel in my spine. Paris is a city that devours the weak. Smiles at you with its glittering lights, its grand boulevards, its promise of beauty, and then it tests you, crushing your pride beneath the weight of rent, ambition, and indifference. My studio on Rue Oberkampf had one window, overlooking a narrow alley where stray cats prowled and drunkards argued at midnight. When it rained, water slid through cracks in the plaster and pooled on the floor. I learned to sleep with an umbrella above my bed, a dark comedy I didn't share with anyone. Till I loved that little room. It was mine, every imperfection included. By day, I scoured the city for work. Cafes, bookstores, galleries, anywhere that would take me. Most doors closed the moment I mentioned I had no degree, no family support, no references worth noting. Paris had no patience for dreamers without pedigree. Finally, I found a job as an assistant to a small architectural firm in the Marais. The owner, Monsieur Lambert, was a stiff man with rimless glasses and an obsession with punctuality. He didn't care about my dreams. He only cared that I typed his reports, fetched his coffee, and made photocopies without complaint. I told myself it was enough. At least I was close to the world I wanted. I watched the real architects draft projects for luxury apartments and boutique hotels, their screens glowing with the designs I longed to create. In silence, I studied every detail I could steal with my eyes. That night, I went home and recreated them from memory, teaching myself through imitation and stubbornness. But the hunger in me was restless. One evening, while leaving the office late, I crossed paths with a young woman about my age, holding a portfolio under her arm. Her name was Camille Dubois. She was bold where I was quiet, sharp where I was cautious. She had grown up in Paris, daughter of a wealthy banker, and carried the kind of confidence that money breeds. Yet for some reason, she took interest in me. "You draw, don't you?" she asked one night, catching me sketching on my lunch break. Embarrassed, I nodded. "Show me." I hesitated, but handed her the sketch, a reimagining of a Haussmann facade, softened with Art Nouveau curves. Her eyes widened. "You're wasted here," she said. "Lambert doesn't see you." But I do. From that day, Camille and I became unlikely companions. She invited me to soirees where young architects and designers mingled, sipping wine under strings of fairy lights, debating Bauhaus versus brutalism like it was religion. I was awkward, always the outsider, but Camille pushed me into conversations. "Elise has ideas," she would insist, forcing the spotlight onto me. Some laughed, dismissing me as a provincial girl with big dreams. Others listened, and one of them would change everything. His name was Laurent Duval. Tall, silver-haired, with the elegance of a man who belonged in both boardrooms and galleries. He was a renowned developer known for restoring historic landmarks across France. When I spoke about my obsession with ruins, about how broken spaces could be reborn, he didn't laugh. He leaned closer. "You speak like an architect," he said. "Not an assistant." I will never forget the electricity of those words. For the first time in years, someone powerful saw me not as a servant, but as what I truly was. Of course, nothing in Paris comes without cost. Laurent offered me an internship, unpaid at first, but with exposure to real projects. It meant leaving Lambert's firm, where I earned just enough to survive. Camille urged me to take it. "Opportunities don't knock twice here," she said. I jumped. The following months nearly destroyed me. My internship consumed me, long nights drafting models, endless revisions, criticisms that cut like knives. Laurent demanded perfection. "If you want to restore ruins," he told me once, "you must first learn to endure being broken yourself." I lived on coffee and bread, my body shrinking while my portfolio grew. Some nights I cried, asking myself if I had made another mistake. But every time I stood before a crumbling building with Laurent, every time I touched stone older than my bloodline, I remembered why I fought. Then came the Montreal project. A forgotten chateau on the outskirts of Paris, its walls collapsing, its history nearly erased. Laurent trusted me with preliminary sketches. Me, a girl with no degree, no name, no connections. I poured my soul into that design, blending preservation with modern grace, imagining the ruin as both memory and rebirth. When Laurent unveiled my sketches in a presentation, I held my breath. The room fell silent. Then applause. It was the first time Paris applauded me. But applause does not guarantee safety. Jealous whispers spread quickly. Other interns resented me, accusing me of seducing Laurent, of stealing credit. Camille warned me, "Paris loves to raise you up, Elise, but it also loves to tear you down." She was right. Rumors followed me, biting at my heels. Yet I pressed forward. For every whisper, I answered with work. For every sneer, I answered with drawings that spoke louder than their malice. And slowly, doors began to open. Success is never pure. It always carries a shadow. For a brief time, I let myself believe that Paris had finally accepted me. Laurent trusted me with more responsibilities. Camille introduced me as a rising architect, and strangers began remembering my name. I walked with my head higher, though always cautious, as if waiting for fate to yank me down again. And then it did. It was a late autumn evening when I saw her. I had just finished a site visit at the Montreal Chateau and stopped at a cafe for warmth. Through the window, I caught a reflection that froze my blood. Blonde hair tied neatly, sharp eyes scanning the street, lips that once shaped words like weapons. Sabine, my sister. Cafes spun around me. For years, I had imagined this moment, what I would say, what I would do, but when she stood a few meters away, flesh and breath, I felt like a child again, cornered and betrayed. She hadn't changed much, only polished herself further. A tailored coat, expensive boots, the kind of effortless elegance that shouted privilege. She carried herself like someone who had never doubted her place in the world. I ducked my head, but she noticed me. Her gaze sharpened, recognition flickering. And then she smiled. That smile, sweet on the surface, venom underneath. "Elise," she said, as if tasting the name she once buried under lies. "Paris suits you." My hands trembled, but I forced my voice steady. "What are you doing here?" She sat opposite me without invitation, her perfume clouding the air. "I live here now. My fiancé has business in Paris. A banker, of course. You wouldn't know him." I clenched my jaw. "Why talk to me? Haven't you taken enough?" Her eyes glittered. "You still hold grudges. How quaint. I only wanted to see how my little sister turned out after all that. All that. As if destroying my life, stripping me of family, dignity, and home was a trivial footnote. "You lied," I hissed. "You ruined me." Sabine sipped her coffee, unbothered. "And yet, look at you. Flourishing." Perhaps my cruelty was motivation. I wanted to throw the cup in her face. Instead, I whispered, "Leave me alone." But she didn't. Sabine reappeared again and again at soirees where Laurent was present, at exhibitions where my designs were displayed, even at Camille's gatherings. Always smiling, always inserting herself into conversations. "Oh, Elise is my sister," she would purr, as if we shared some tender bond. People believed her charm. They always did. Soon, whispers spread. Sabine, the refined sister, Elise, the provincial dreamer clawing her way up. Comparison, rivalry, gossip, it poisoned the air I breathed. One night, Camille pulled me aside. "You never told me you had a sister." "Because she's not truly my sister anymore," I said bitterly. Camille frowned. "She says differently. And she's clever, Elise. People listen." The warning gnawed at me. Things worsened when Laurent announced a competition within the firm. Each architect would propose a vision for a new cultural center in Lyon. The winning design would be built. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, the kind of project that could anchor a career. I poured everything into my proposal. Days blurred into nights. My hands shook from exhaustion, my walls plastered with sketches, models, calculations. The vision burned in me, a structure that embraced both past and future, light spilling like rebirth through restored stone. But when the proposals were presented, a sick chill crawled over me. Sabine was there. Not as an architect, she had no training, but as a consultant attached to a rival firm. And in their presentation, I saw echoes of my design. My curves, my motifs, my philosophy of rebirth woven into their model. I nearly collapsed. Afterward, I confronted her in the hallway, my voice raw with fury. "You stole from me." She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Don't be dramatic. Ideas flow, Elise. Perhaps we share inspiration." "You read my notebooks," I accused. "Back then, in our childhood, you used to steal my words. Now you steal my vision." She smirked. "Maybe you should protect your dreams better." Her cruelty was deliberate, sharpened like a knife. I returned home that night shaking, rage and despair choking me. Camille tried to comfort me, swearing she'd testify if needed. But how do you fight someone who thrives on manipulation, who can twist every accusation into envy? The worst came weeks later, when Laurent summoned me privately. "Elise," he said gently, "there are concerns about originality. The whispers that you borrow too much. You must be careful." His words shattered me. Me accused of stealing when I was the one robbed. The injustice burned hotter than fire. I left his office with tears I refused to let fall. Paris had begun to recognize me, but Sabine's shadow threatened to drag me back into ruin. That night, I stood at the Seine, the water black and endless. I thought of Ethan. No, in my life, his name was Henri, my brother long estranged, whose silence mirrored the silence of every betrayal I had endured. For a moment, the urge to step into the river nearly consumed me. But then I remembered the ruins, stones that had crumbled yet still stood. And I whispered to myself, I am not done. Sabine had returned, yes. But this time I would not be voiceless. This time Paris would hear my truth. Silence is a prison. For years I had accepted its bars, thinking that if I stayed quiet the storm would pass, the world would stop mistaking me for a villain. But silence only gave Sabine room to grow her lies, like ivy choking every wall I tried to build. The accusations whispered in Laurent's office haunted me for days. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I touched a pencil, I felt fear. Will this design be stolen too? Will they say it wasn't mine? Camille begged me not to give in. If you stop now, she wins, she told me, fierce as always. Sabine thrives because people like you don't fight back. I wanted to believe her. But my voice had been crushed once before at 18 when I was branded a thief of my own future. Now Paris threatened to brand me again. One evening, I found myself back in Montreuil, standing before the ruins that had once mirrored my life. The stones stood, scarred yet defiant, refusing to disappear. I sat there until night wrapped around me, the cold gnawing at my bones. And then something inside me shifted. I would no longer let Sabine define me. The next week, during the firm's internal review, I asked Laurent for 5 minutes. He hesitated, but I pressed. If I don't speak now, my work has no meaning, I said. In that meeting room, with my colleagues and rivals present, I stood. My hand shook, but my voice carried. I have been accused of borrowing too much, I began. Let me tell you what I've borrowed: hunger, betrayal, nights without shelter. Those were my tutors. Every line I draw comes from surviving them. Murmurs rippled. Laurent leaned forward. I continued, louder now. The motifs in my design, the curves, the broken arches, I drew them from Montreal's ruins. I have sketches, journals dated from 2 years ago. They carry coffee stains, rain marks, even tears. They are mine. If they resemble another firm's design, it is not coincidence, it is theft. From me. And then, for the first time in public, I spoke Sabine's name. My sister has stolen from me before. She stole my future once, when I was 18. She stole my voice, my family's trust, my very place in the world. And now she tries to steal my work. But I will not be silent again. The room was electric. Some looked shocked, others skeptical, but none could deny the conviction in my words. Later, Camille squeezed my hand. That was brave. Risky, but brave. News spread quickly. Paris loves scandal. Soon whispers shifted. Perhaps Elise wasn't the thief. Perhaps she was the victim. And for the first time, Sabine's smile faltered when we crossed paths. One night, she cornered me outside a gallery. What do you think you're doing? She hissed. Dragging our family name through mud? I stared at her. It was never our family name you cared about. Only yours. She smirked, but there was tension in her jaw. You think people will believe you? They never did before. I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. This time, I have proof. Sketches, dates, witnesses. And I have something I never had as a girl: courage to keep speaking, even when the world wants me silent. For the first time, Sabine had no clever reply. That night, walking home along the Seine, I felt lighter. Not safe, not victorious, but lighter. I knew the battle wasn't over. Sabine would fight, claw, manipulate, but I had broken the silence. And once silence is broken, it can never cage you the same way again. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that happened, I realize that life rarely gives us the story we expect. My journey was filled with betrayal, silence, unspoken truths, and battles I never asked for. But in the end, it became a path towards strength, clarity, and self-respect. I lost people I once thought I couldn't live without, but I gained something even greater: myself. When you go through storms like mine, you come out different. You shed illusions, you stop pretending, and you begin to see people as they are, not as you wish them to be. That change is painful, but it is also liberating. I want to share with you the 5 lessons I took from this journey, lessons I believe can help anyone facing similar struggles. 1. Silence can be louder than words. There were times when I stayed quiet, hoping silence would protect me or smooth over conflict. But silence often speaks volumes. It can either shield your dignity or betray your pain. I learned that choosing when to speak and when to stay silent is an art, and both can be acts of power. 2. Family is more than blood. I discovered that not everyone born into your family truly belongs to your heart. Some people will betray you even if they share your last name. Others, with no blood ties, will stand by you through your darkest hours. Family is not defined by DNA, it's defined by loyalty, respect, and love. 3. Self-respect is non-negotiable. For too long, I tolerated things that slowly chipped away at my worth. I thought being patient was strength, but it was really self-betrayal. The moment I began respecting myself, demanding honesty, and setting boundaries, my life shifted. Self-respect isn't arrogance, it's survival. For truth always finds a way out. Secrets and lies may hide for a while, but they never stay buried. Truth has a way of breaking through, often at the most unexpected times. What felt like devastation at first became freedom once the truth came to light. If you're carrying secrets for someone else, ask yourself, are you protecting them or are you slowly destroying yourself? 5. Healing comes from within. No apology, no revenge, no justice can heal the wounds others leave in your soul. Healing is something you choose. I had to stop waiting for someone to fix me, to say I'm sorry, or to make things right. The moment I took responsibility for my own healing, the weight began to lift. If my story has shown you anything, I hope it's this: you are stronger than the pain you carry. Betrayal can break your heart, but it doesn't have to break your spirit. You can rebuild, you can rise, and you can find peace on your own terms. Thank you for walking with me through this journey. If you found meaning in my story, I ask you to share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And if you want more stories like this, raw, real, and deeply human, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Together, we can turn pain into power and brokenness into something beautifully whole.